Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my podcast on health. Today, we're going to look at what your disease is trying to tell you. Now, these are just my own observations. You may very well have your own, and a lot of us are familiar with, for example, Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Yourself, looking at all the ways that our bodies may be sending us signals that tell us what we need to be aware of. I believe our subconscious is always giving us messages. We just don't always listen, or sometimes we don't know how to listen, so it gets expressed through the body. I also think that in Western society, for example, intellect is really emphasized. So we're often taught to suppress our emotions or rationalize them away. So you may tell yourself, well, I'm okay about being in this destructive relationship or dissatisfying job or living where I live. And maybe it's really not working for you, but you're not listening. You're going about your day just stuffing down inside of yourself any voice that says this isn't working or this isn't your path. This is not in alignment with what your soul came here to do. And over time, that can express itself as disease. If you think of yourself as an energy field that exists in many layers, and I'm a big fan of Barbara Ann Brennan's book, Hands of Light, where she was actually a nuclear physicist working for NASA who was also able to see energy fields. And so she wrote a few really amazing books on the subject and with illustrations on the different layers of the field. One of the layers is the emotional layer. So the idea is that disruption in the field first happens in those layers, especially, for example, in the emotional layer. We may get disruption when we stuff our feelings down. We create congestion in the human energy field. And if it's there long enough, it will filter down into the physical. Basically, we are energy, but the body is just the slowest moving part of the field. All those little atoms are still moving around. They're just not moving as quickly, so we appear solid. So it makes sense that if there is some sort of disruption in the flow of energy, and if it exists long enough, it's going to eventually show up in our bodies. What we want to start to do is to become more aware sooner of the signals our body is giving us. Now, if you're already in the middle of dealing with a disease or even an injury, you got injured as a way for the universe to slow you down and get you to look at what's going on inside of you, this is still effective in that you can either sit with your condition and say, why me? Or you can sit with and go, well, why me? Why did this occur? What is the message here? What am I meant to learn from this experience? Which helps you get so much more out of it than just waiting for a cure, waiting to heal, to actually use this time to deal with whatever's going on inside of you. And it's, I have to say, honestly, I'm the worst patient. I remember when I had a problem, my back went out when I was in my 40s. And I was lying in bed one day, just fed up with the fact that my back wasn't working very well. So I decided, well, this is stupid. I'm going for a walk. And my partner at the time found me in the backyard and carried me inside. It was just, I'm not at all patient with illness. So getting sarcoidosis really tested my patience. I really had to learn to accept that this doesn't go away. It can be dormant, but it's a reminder my whole life that I have to stay mindful. I have to continue to work on my stuff. And the funny thing with the back injury is at the same time I ended up getting an ear infection and had vertigo. So I can't walk. I'm dizzy as all get out. Talk about the universe just throwing me down on my back and saying, you're going to do the inner work and we're not going to let you get better until you do. So, I've had that experience, and sarcoidosis was really hard. When I first got it, I was diagnosed after having a bronchoscopy. And after several different kinds of samples were taken out of my lungs, it aggravated my asthma. And for the next 2 weeks, I really struggled. And of all things, my doctor went on vacation, and they didn't know how far downhill I went after the surgery until somebody finally got a hold of them and I finally got some medication. But for 2 weeks, I was lying in bed, literally unable to catch my breath and having extreme chest pain. It was really scary. I couldn't sleep because I literally couldn't breathe. And I had to just keep calling on my doctors to say, hey, I need something now. I can't wait until you get back. And I'm very lucky because I live in a part of the world where I have to get this medication, but I can afford it. I can access it. It really gave me a lot of compassion for people in other parts of the world who may be dealing with the same condition and don't have the medical care. So one thing that illness does is it can teach us patience, compassion, compassion for everybody else dealing with the same condition. It takes a lot of patience with your body, especially if you're used to being relatively healthy. I've had asthma most of my life, but it hasn't really held me back very much. So when something really does fell you, it really does mean you have to stop and go inward and say, what's the message here? Sometimes we have to stop because we just can't get up and keep going the way we normally would, especially when you're a bad patient and you're just like, no, I just need to move on. Let's just get this dealt with so I can do other things. Slowing down is a necessary part of our spiritual development. We do have to stop and go inward. And when we're bullheaded and impatient, sometimes illness is honestly the best way to make us stop and do that internal work that all of us have to do if we're going to become more conscious. So when it comes to our physical form, pay attention to where your condition shows up. One theory is that the left side of our body is the feminine and the right side is the masculine. So what I mean by that, it's not a gender thing. It's about energy. So the feminine is the intuitive, receptive. We receive information through the feminine. The masculine is the part that takes action or creates the structure that supports the feminine. So for example, in my work as a psychic coach, if I was totally in the feminine, I would be offering my services, but maybe I wouldn't really have a proper office or a proper fee structure. The masculine means I'm incorporated. I have an office, I have a fee structure. It supports me and sustains me to continue to do this work. So that's an example for you. So if we are not able to receive, we might have some disruption on the feminine. And I realize I'm flipped here. So for you guys, that was my right side, but it's my left side for me. If we're too fearful, say, of moving forward on something, or we in some way are holding ourselves back, we might get a disruption on the masculine side. So for example, if you injure your right leg, are you having a problem with moving forward on something? Is there something internal that has to shift first for you to feel capable of taking that step forward? If you suffer in some way on the left side, is there some way you're blocked to receiving? One thing I also want to bring up that I find really interesting is how often I see people who grew up basically being taught that their value wasn't in who they were, but in how they performed. That a lot of times, the only time they feel it's okay for them to receive is if they are injured or ill. And that's when they feel like, okay, it's okay for me to let somebody care for me. And especially if as a kid, you were always pushed, do more, be more, and never really allowed just to relax and play, then as an adult, you may still have this pattern of really not letting anybody do for you unless you're incapacitated. So that's a really important signal for you right there. Can you allow yourself to relax, to rest, to receive without having to feel awful at the same time? You don't have to earn this. In fact, part of our spiritual development is we all need downtime. We all need time to contemplate what's going on in our lives, what's going on within us. So we know our next move. We have to stop and go, okay, what's this bringing up for me? What do I need to be aware of? How does that need to show up in my reality in terms of my actions or what I'm able to receive? If you don't take that downtime, you're always going to be operating from your intellect, and it's never going to get you where you need to go, because that's not where our wisdom comes from. Okay. Another thing is to look at where in our body disruption occurs. Now, if you watch my last video, you'll know with my sarcoidosis, which can appear anywhere in the body, for me it showed up as growths in the lymph nodes around my heart. I literally had a wall around my heart. And I did what the doctor said, and I learned about supplements I could also take, but I worked on the pattern. Why was I shielding my heart? What was I protecting myself from? What was the past trauma that created the shielding in the first place? And how could I support the parts of me still stuck in that trauma to realize that that's no longer happening and it's okay for them to let love in? Now, that deeper work of actually going in and finding those parts and working with them and parenting them, well, that's one of my fortes as a psychic coach. So if you're not sure how to get there, you can go to my website, spiritkelowna.com, also benitasummers.com, and you can book a session with me, and I can get you there because I can help you directly tap into your subconscious and understand where the issues are coming from, how to work with them at the spiritual level so the body can calm down. I often find that we end up with chaos in our bodies and chaos in the world around us because we either aren't willing or are unable to sit with the chaos of emotion inside of ourselves. When you're willing to sit with your emotional discomfort and actually process it at that level and gain that awareness, the world around you and your body tend to calm down. Even if you're dealing with pain, you'll find you're not adding pain to your pain by moving out of resistance and more into receptivity. What is this about? What is the message here? What is it trying to teach me? Pay attention to what organs are affected. Do you tend to hang on to things? Well, if you're having issues with your liver, maybe it can't filter properly because symbolically, you're hanging on to things and the body is symbolizing that through the liver. It's funny that in our dream state, we will often dream in puns. And they actually did a study at one time where they had people, just before they fell asleep, they flashed all these images in front of them, and then they monitored what their dreams turned out like. And one person dreamt of a captain on a ship. And two of the images that this person had been shown before they fell asleep were one of a cap and one of a tin. So their mind put it together as captain and put a captain on a ship in their dream. The body is very metaphorical as well. Certain organs represent certain things. If we're not eliminating properly, again, in what way are we hanging on to things? And if there's been, for example, abuse done to our bodies when we're young, quite often we'll store energy there. We don't feel we can let go. We can't release because we're pulled tight. We're pulling away from what was done to us. And so when you're like that long enough, that disruption is going to show up in the body. A lot of times when I've worked with clients who are dealing with pain, when I help them to tune into that area of their body and work through what the patterns are, a lot of times people do find their sense of pain shifts and changes. Either they feel less pain or they're processing their pain differently, and then it becomes a tool for their development. So notice what is going on with your body. And when something isn't feeling right, check in, pay attention. Why am I feeling off? What is my body trying to tell me? Depending on where you're feeling it, what is that about? For example, I've talked to somebody who was having a problem in a relationship in their life, but they weren't communicating it clearly. So they had neck pain. That person had literally become a pain in the neck because they were not communicating through their throat chakra. The energy there got congested. And here's another thing that will happen with the chakras, and I'll explain. Chakras are energy vortexes in the energy field. They are like the gills on a fish. They bring energy in and out of our field with the energy surrounding us. If you think of it this way, we are a unified field of energy. And within that unified field, there are all these points of consciousness, of which we are one of those points each. And our field is designed to enable us to receive energy from the field around us and move energy out. So when there is some sort of congestion in those different points in our field, where we are a point in the main field and we have points within ours, it's the macrocosm and the microcosm, then that energy isn't able to flow freely. And a lot of times what I'll see, because when I'm working with chakras, I can actually put my hand on either side of them and feel the flow. So I'll explain that. If you think of these vortices, for example, the central chakra starts at the crown, goes all the way down and comes out at the base of our body. And we have ones that go through the third eye, through the throat, the heart, the solar plexus, the sacral, which is where our reproductive organs are. And we have them in our hands, our feet. There's actually quite a few, but most people think of the 7 main ones when they're thinking of the chakra system. So if, say, for example, you grew up feeling like you couldn't clearly communicate your needs to somebody, maybe you'd get in trouble for speaking up, you might shield one end of that chakra, and maybe you'll do it at the back or the front. So you might have coughs or throat problems, or you might have a pain in the back of your neck because at one end or the other, you're shielding because you're afraid of being attacked. So when that shielding occurs, that energy no longer flows. If I put my hand on either side of the chakra, one hand on one side, one on the other, I can feel the energy oscillating through that opening, through that field, that vortex. And if it's not oscillating properly, or one end feels shielded, it's really obvious to someone like me who's developed that sensitivity. The thing is, you can learn how to open them yourself, and that's something we'll be getting to later on. But for now, just to be aware that if you have some kind of pain, I'm not saying, don't see your doctor. I'm saying go to your doctor, do all the things you need to do medically, because, I don't use the term alternative medicine. I use the term complementary medicine. All the different ways that we can heal ourselves can be mutually beneficial. So definitely do those things. In fact, a lot of times if a client comes to me with a physical complaint, the first thing I'll say is, have you seen your doctor? Have you ruled out that there's something physical going on? Or if you're being treated for something physical, then let's look at how we can support that treatment with these techniques. So definitely make sure that you don't deny yourself the opportunity to get a doctor's opinion, because even if there's a chemical imbalance, even if there's something else going on, that's more information. What is symbolically out of balance then? So, it's really good to make sure you're working with all the cards in your deck, as it were. So when those sorts of things occur, when there's pain, when there's disruption, maybe there's tiredness, which means there's not a lot of energy flowing the way it should. You want to be really aware of that. You want to start checking in. Okay, how does that relate to something going on inside of me or something going on in my life? Am I struggling to communicate? Is there something I don't want to see? Am I feeling emotionally unsafe to express myself? Am I holding myself back in some way? And it might not be about something going on currently. Maybe you have the most wonderful partner in the world, but you're not really letting them in because of stuff from the past. Because when those habits of self-protection are formed early in life, they become unconscious habits. And as adults, that's when we have to find a way to wake them up and support them to come to consciousness so they no longer have to shield and therefore disrupt the field and ultimately the body. If there's something going on below the heart, across the solar plexus, well, that's our power chakra. Is there some way you feel disenfranchised? Is there some way you hold yourself back? If it's at the sacral, whether it's having gone through sexual abuse or being shut down as a kid, our throat and our sacral are connected. We may feel we can't express ourselves. We may hold back on how we do that. The sacral is also the seat of vitality and creativity. If we're afraid to be really visible, that energy is often suppressed. The root chakra at the base of the spine, how safe do you feel to be in your body? If you've gone through stuff as a kid that made you feel unsafe, your root chakra may not have a lot of energy going on there. It may need some help as well. And there are ways you could learn to ground in your body. And that's something we'll be talking about later too. So for now, pay attention. Pay attention to what you feel in your body. Even if something hasn't manifested as a legitimate illness per se, if something feels off, start to pay attention to it at that level. Start to pay attention to it at the energetic and emotional level. As a therapeutic touch practitioner, one of the things we've learned how to do, people in me in my field, is to scan our body and scan other people's energy fields as well. It's the field we're scanning for disruption. And in one case, this one practitioner got up every morning and she would sit on the side of her bed and she would scan from head to toe just to feel if there was anything that felt off that day. And on one particular day, something felt off at her chest. And she went to her doctor and she insisted on an ultrasound. Even though he did a breast exam and he couldn't find anything, she absolutely insisted, I know something's wrong. They did the ultrasound and they discovered inflammatory breast cancer. It doesn't produce a lump. In most cases, by the time you know you have it, you're already done for. She caught it early enough that they were able to treat it because she sensed the disruption in her field as it was starting to translate into her body. How powerful is that? That's the power every one of us has if we know how to work with our energy, with our bodies as tools for our awareness. I'm excited about sharing more of these tools with you as we go forward in this podcast. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.